Hello, everyone. Aaron Grizel here from BCAF, the Black and Brown Comics Arts Festival, a program of the Northern California Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Community Foundation. And we're happy to be partnered with Comic-Con again to present our Afrofuturism panel entitled Afrofuturism, Funk, and the Black Imagination. And we have 5 great panelists today to help us with this discussion, beginning with Ytasha Womack. Ytasha is the author of Afrofuturism, The World of Black Sci-Fi and Fantasy Culture. We also have Tim Fielder, the author and creator of the new HarperCollins Amistad graphic novel, Infinitum, an Afrofuturist tale. It's available wherever books are sold. And then we have John Jennings, the founder and curator of Abrams Megascope and the professor of Media and Cultural Studies at the University of California, Riverside. And then last but not least, we have Pamela Thomas and Lorene Williamson, the founders and curators of the Museum of Uncut Funk. You can find the Museum of Uncut Funk at museumofuncutfunk.com. Now we begin our discussion with Ytasha providing a definition of Afrofuturism and its cultural significance, after which we enter into a conversation with the group.
So Afrofuturism is a way of looking at the future or alternate realities, but through this Black cultural lens. And when I'm saying Black, I mean people of African descent on the continent who really embrace that identity, who are all over the world. And it looks at it's an artistic aesthetic, and that you see it in music and art and dance and sci-fi literature. But it's also a kind of a method and a practice. And I like to say that it intersects the imagination, liberation, technology, mysticism, Black cultures. And I'm probably most excited about it because it really celebrates the imagination and talks about the role of the imagination in culture. I think Afrofuturism is important because it's a reminder for people that different cultures have a relationship to space and time. And it's also a reminder to people of the contributions that people of the African continent and African descent have made to our understanding of space and time. It's a reminder of how that's expressed in the culture. It's a reminder of these things, but it's also a very much affirmation of being able to create and imagine new futures, to tell stories about those futures, and to do so in a way where you're very much engaging the past as well. So when you look at Afrofuturist words, they aren't always on another planet far off into space. Sometimes they are in the past, or they are in these kind of altered worlds. And there's always this interesting relationship, I think, between mysticism and engaging history and future and deconstructing time. So Afrofuturism, it's really fun. It's very cool, but I think more specifically, it just highlights perspectives by Black creators and Black thinkers who are just really engaging in their future.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so as the its significance its significance and importance, say, to one Black culture as a culture, but to the culture writ large, to popular culture writ large, and to its continued growth. Where do you see about Afrofuturism? What's the importance of Afrofuturism in those two stances, the Black culture writ large, kind of thing?
Well, I think one of the pretty fascinating things about it is that it reminds people that they have been engaging in sort of these limited contemplations around what futures can look like. And sometimes you don't know what you haven't been thinking about until these perspectives are brought to the center. And you're like, wait a second, I hadn't really thought about, the Congolese culture and the interplanetary worlds it could inspire, right? Or I hadn't really thought about, looking at, the Mississippi Delta as an articulation of a new future, or I hadn't thought about, there's a lot of things that sometimes people kind of glossed over, um, because they weren't really engaging or embracing sort of the visionary perspectives by, Black cultures and Black creatives. So I think that for many people, it's like the missing part of a whole. As human beings, when we're coming to understand ourselves, you want to engage in the perspectives of in the life lessons and experiences from around the world, because you can connect, you can have a deeper relationship with yourself, you can have a deeper relationship with the earth, a deeper relationship with space, and a deeper relationship with your communities. So that to me is really the benefit of it. It helps us to understand our own humanity, to understand the kind of exciting or interesting life experiences that have shaped how Black creators or Black communities have thought about futures. There are many answers, I think, to building new kinds of paths, and just insights, I think, that are really great. But it's also a great world of storytelling.
Yes.
And it also gives us a better way to kind of contextualize things that Black creatives have already created, funk being one of them. So when you think about funk and you think about it as Afrofuturist, and then suddenly it becomes more than just this really cool dance music that really touched your soul. You're like, wait a second, there's an intergalactic element here, there's an earth element here, and there's a sort of synergy that's being created by understanding the thoughts that lend itself to creating, say, funk music.
So Pam and Lorene, you all have a very unique museum. What inspired the framework of that museum in this space? Because I mean, you all had some thoughts about it. You come from a generation, I'm feeling, that has some funk music connected to it. So what was that connect, and how did that sort of imagination and exploration sort of come into your molding of the museum in the way that you did it?
Well, for me, it started with, Lorene having a collection of animation, and me simply asking the question, where was all the Black animation? Because again, she was collecting Warner Brothers and Looney Tunes and things like that, original artwork from the cartoons used under the camera. And so that kind of started us on this journey of finding all of the original artwork that we could from those cartoons. And then I've always had a love of movie posters. And, when I was 12, my stepfather took me to see Foxy Brown, and he had no idea what the movie was about, but I was infatuated with Pam Grier. And so I kind of talked him into letting me see that movie. And of course, he was floored, but I got to see the movie. And from that point forward, as I got older, it's always been this love of that decade. And then when we started to pursue this museum idea, looking back on, again, for me, the movies and the movie posters, and Lorene with the music, and for some reason, I don't know where I was, the music thing kind of just came and went, but I started to get reconnected with the music. And we really didn't get introduced to Afrofuturism. Well, I'll say for myself, maybe 10 years ago when we did that, the Comic-Con in Tim. And then the pieces just started coming together. And it was like, okay, this is making a lot of sense, but I still don't quite get the whole Afrofuturism. Of course, as time went on, I started understanding it more. and taking a greater appreciation for all of the artists and the actors and, you know, all of the imagination and all of the craft that has gone into Afrofuturism. And, you know, I'm still absorbing and still learning and still, you know, being in awe of all the things that we have created but have not been recognized for.
Mm.
And I feel like with everything everyone is doing individually in their craft and creating this dynamic wealth of information on Afrofuturism, it's bringing more light to, you know, yes, we are a part of this. Yes, actually, we created this, to the point where I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, well, let's talk about ancient Africa and the astrologers and you know, their theories on space and the stars and things of that nature, and the pharaohs. And, you know, that would be an amazing topic, and amazing research to make those connections, and how it has transcribed itself into Afrofuturism today.
Lorraine, what's your, when you were collecting all of that animation, and when you were thinking about the idea of this museum from your angle, what was it that was sort of primary to you in terms of your interest there?
See, I mean, it's interesting because, you know, my love of 70s Black culture is my love of, you know, growing up during the 70s. You know, I didn't get to go see all of the Blaxploitation movies because my mom wouldn't let me see them. I didn't have somebody I could talk into taking me. But what she did let me do is she let me go to every concert that came to town, because I was really into music. So, you know, I spent my time in my room with my record player and my records, and, you know, listening to, you know, I'd save my allowance, and the minute I got, you know, $5, I'd go to the record store and get the latest and greatest. And, you know, I, you know, used to tape stuff off the radio. So I was just very into music as a kid, you know, very much into funk and R&B and soul and disco and, you know, everything from the 70s, but really funk. And, you know, one of the things that I just, you know, will never forget was, you know, the P-Funk concerts. You know, I saw that mothership come down, you know, and saw George come out. And, you know, that just made such an impression on me. I didn't realize that it was Afrofuturism at the time. I was like, this is some cool, crazy stuff, you know, and I loved the, you know, the album covers. I sit there and read them like they were books, read them from, you know, cover to cover, and look at all the, you know, the different things that they were doing. And it just, I can't even explain, you know, why it was so important, other than the music was funky and I just loved everything about them. So, you know, that's just something that has always stuck with me. Like, you know, I don't listen, I haven't made the transition to hip hop. I'm an old school person. You know, I still, you know, listen to all the stuff I listened to when I was a kid, and all the stuff that I didn't get when I was a kid. And, you know, that's just been like a really important part of my life, because I've got the, you know, the music and the live concert experiences. You know, they just don't perform like that anymore. You know, you don't get those shows when there's like 6 bands, right? And it's like a 3-hour show and they are playing everything. And, you know, the place is packed and everybody's, so, you know, that was such a big part of my childhood, and a big part of, you know, my whole life, that, you know, when, you know, Pam and I kind of, you know, started thinking about putting stuff together, it's like, okay, well, I've got, you know, the music piece, and, you know, again, I couldn't go to the movies, so I watched cartoons, right? So I started collecting, you know, the cartoon cells, and, you know, that question, where are the Black cartoons, just, I was like, oh man, I don't have an answer for that. And I'm taking that personally, like, that's a challenge. We can go out and find these cartoons. So it just really started from things that, you know, I remember in my childhood. Then we started collecting stuff. And then, you know, you get a collection, like, okay, this is interesting. What are we going to do with this? Right? Let's, you know, put it on the internet and let people see it. And that is really how the museum came about. It's like, we have all this really cool stuff that we collected because we just loved it. And we got, you know, kind of obsessed with finding the next thing. Like, you start collecting one thing and you see another thing, and, you know, you start to become aware of what's out there. And also, I think we both felt it was very important for somebody Black to own it. it's our history.
Mhm.
And, it's like, she who owns the artifacts gets to tell the story and gets to write the narrative. And it's just important that we own our own history.
Mhm.
And this was stuff that we could afford. And again, stuff we were really into. So it started out as, again, great memories from childhood into, wow, we kind of have some, aspects of a collection to, gee, let's continue to build it to, okay, let's actually put this online and let people see it, which, evolved into, what, we should create some exhibitions and get it out there. So it's just something that kind of took on a life of its own, just because we got into it and really loved what we were doing. And, we are trying to, make it what we do. It is who we are. We're trying to also make it what we do. And really evolve that into, being able to educate people about unique aspects of Black history that they don't know. And Afrofuturism just happens to kind of cross through, the 70s and cross through our collection in ways that we continue to learn about. So.
Yeah, now that's right, John. So on that, John, you're sort of the glue that binds sort of this group together. It tends to be that way every time you're on a panel. So John, you started this Megascope thing, and I remember you were talking to me about it years ago about this piece. What was why did you want to do that? And then the titles that you chose that have a specific bent toward these stories that are central to what we're talking about today. And now you got with Yatasha Black Cube coming up in 2022, and you've got these new imprints. What was that inspiration to bring Megascope to life and then out to the world?
Well, I think a lot of it goes back to the first time I started thinking about or early inclinations towards Afrofuturism, which is like, for me, it was like 2007, 2008, something like that. I was working on this collection of images that I had created called Matters of the Fact, and it was a bunch of like Black cyborgs, because I was thinking about like stereotypes and like how stereotypes kind of get reinvented. And I was thinking about like, stereotyping being like mechanical. And so, metaphorically, allegorically, I was thinking about like technology and the Black body in a particular way. And then what ended up happening was a friend of mine said, hey, this looks Afrofuturist. And I didn't know what it was at first. And I was like, oh, okay, let me go do some digging around. And eventually I came across this film by Nnedi Okorafor called The Last Angel of History, right? And The Last Angel of History is about, it's a 44-minute long video, I think, and it's looking at like Black music and like technology and intersections with science fiction. So they're interviewing people like George Clinton, a guy named Gerald Goldie, from the UK. And at the beginning of it, though, I'm from Mississippi, by the way, like Tim. They talk about the Robert Johnson mythology, right? And they talk about the idea that he goes down to the crossroads to become a better blues player. And then he's given this, what they call a Black secret technology, right?
Oh, yeah.
And they call it the blues. And then he said, hey, if you can actually take this technology, there's also this keyword called the mothership connection that will actually unpack everything for you. And so it's given to this, and it was given to this guy who was a data thief, who was a time traveling archaeologist. And essentially what he was like, he was the character that was molding all this stuff together. And I started thinking about technology very differently after that, right? What I call a pan-technological impulse, like looking at things that are like extensions of ourselves, right? And so then me and my friend, our friend actually, Ronaldo Anderson, and I were curating a show at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, where we have the comic book show, the Black Comic Book Festival. And the show was called Unveiling Visions, The Alchemy of the Black Imagination. And so what I started looking at was, I was looking for like what they call diegetic prototypes. That is objects or technologies that were created inside of stories to have conversations with the reader, And so that includes stuff like the time machine, for instance, is a diegetic prototype, that kind of stuff. But I was looking for Black ones, right? And so what happens is I came across a bunch of them. And then the same time we were actually curating that show, Britt Russert and Adrian Brown found this unseen, undiscovered W.E.B. Du Bois science fiction story called The Princess Steel. And inside of it is this technology called the megascope. It's a device that can actually like see through time and space and other dimensions. And I was like, what? This is crazy. And he wrote this like before his other science fiction stories when he was still at Clark Atlanta, actually, by the way, Clark Atlanta alone in the house, right? Yeah, he was still in Atlanta when he wrote this. And this is so the whole piece was about this white couple that goes to New York on vacation, and they go to see this this device that is being advertised, right? And the entire setup is he uses the megascope to set up a discourse about the U.S. steel industry. It's actually quite brilliant. It's very short, but it's like he sets all the stuff. And so what happens is, because of the success of the Octavia Butler books with Abrams that me and my good friend Damian Duffy did, it afforded us an opportunity to pitch a line of books that was specifically geared towards folk of color, BIPOC creators, by and about people of color, but looking at speculative fiction primarily. And when I say speculative fiction, we're talking science fiction, fantasy, horror, magical realism, things that are considered to not be real, you know? Yeah. And I'm really, really still very fascinated with the idea of various types of technologies, because, you know, a book is a technology, reading, you know, that kind of thing. The systems that produce types of effects are technologies as well, you know, that kind of thing. We don't think about them that way, but they are, because they're extensions of ourselves. And the types of books we're looking for, you know, After the Rain, for instance, the first one that I wrote, that I adapted from Nnedi Okorafor's short story, is an African jujuist piece that's about like this young woman who's from Chicago, who interacts with these ancestral spirits that unlocks a hidden secret, you know, from her background. But it takes place in Africa, you know. So, and she's Niger-American, so she's Nigerian American. Hard Ears is like a fantasy story that takes place in an alternative world that is very similar to Barbados, but it's magical, right? And it's also a satire that's actually analyzing colonialism and hypercapitalism. Black Star is this all women of color led adventure story that takes place on a planet where they're looking for the cure for to cancer, you know. And then of course we also do historical fiction. Across the Tracks is a primer that deals with the Tulsa race massacre, excuse me. Yeah, so we're looking at like primarily speculative fiction, historical fiction, and crime fiction too. I'm a big crime fiction fan. So, you know, so those are some of the things we've been doing. But, you know, the initial interest in the megascope came from that film and me rethinking how I'm thinking about technology and about storytelling through different types of technology.
Tasha, you had mentioned that Afrofuturism is also a way of life. What do you mean by that?
You know, it's when I think about my first kind of relationship to things that we now call Afrofuturists. One of, you know, the first things that kind of comes to mind is the music. And I think One Nation Under the Groove by George Clinton was one of the first songs I ever heard. And so the first songs I certainly remember, let's put it that way. And, you know, I grew up in a family where everyone had these huge music collections. And they were also really excited about you knowing the music that they grew up with. So funk music for me was just a big backdrop of life. A lot of jazz music that we now talk about in the context of Afrofuturism, not including Sun Ra, was just a big backdrop of life. Some of the first space imagery I ever saw, it wasn't, I remember Star Wars, but I remember the album covers from Parliament Funk, right? I probably remember saw those first. So this idea of thinking about Black people in space, or space being a very cool place for us to be, these were not difficult concepts. And while I wasn't calling it Afrofuturism growing up, I think just this idea that there's a relationship between music, between space, between life was a very natural one. And the imagination as it related to space in your life was certainly something that was encouraged. And when it wasn't encouraged, it was so evident. And again, these album covers and these music videos, it was just this heightened world of Black life. So, and then, I went to Clark Atlanta University, and you meet people from all over, most of whom are Black from around the world. And there's just this symbiotic relationship between our cultures, our regions, the music from our regions. But regardless of where we were from and what our favorite music was, we all knew funk music as a basis. No one did not know funk music, right? That was the basis. They might not know certain jazz artists, but they definitely knew funk. Someone from California might not know, the hip hop artists from Memphis, but they knew funk. And so I think about like funk music, while I talk about it in terms of it depicting elements of space, it was very earthy. It was very earthy. It's very much a kind of the messy in-betweens of life, in one sense. It's very, I'm trying to think of the word, it's funk is funky, right? That's the best way to explain it. But there's also kind of an epistemology behind funk, which I don't think we're always talk about. It articulates a way of seeing the world. Right. Just through the rhythms, the pacing. There's an easygoing nature to it, but there's a depth. It's connected to a history, but it's articulating this kind of future, but it's very present, and very much a collage. So we talk about hip hop and sampling a lot as this sort of postmodern collage expression. But funk was that too, particularly I think with the emotions, that it pointed to, a lot of the dichotomies that you see, especially in Parliament Funkadelic, where it kind of turns these worlds upside down. Right. What's up is down, what's down is up, kind of this inversion of reality to get you to see a certain kind of truth. And yet it's like this, it's so colorful.
The one line, and I think that epitomized that for me, the one line from Aqua Boogie, with the rhythm, what is it? With the rhythm it takes to dance to what we have to live through, you can dance underwater and not get wet. That right there, to me, was just epitomized how we can thrive and create other worlds through pain that is not only unique to us, but that is almost ineffable, it's indescribable. But we're able to find joy in the depths of difficulty, and to create a type of beat that's undeniable, as you were saying. Tim, you had mentioned, so when I met you, Maddie's Rocket, one of your titles was real, and it was something that for me was totally different. It was different than anything I had, was experiencing at that time when it came to,
thank you.
When it came to what a way to depict character and a Black character in the space. You have some experience in animation as well.
Right.
Talk to us about that Maddie's Rocket experience and what you were looking to depict.
Right.
Sort of at the core of it.
Right. Well, I'll connect what you're saying and what Natasha is saying about history. So at this star date, I am presently 54 years old. I've been doing what we now call Afrofuturism. Back in the day, we just called it Black sci-fi, right? Mm-hmm. And I've been doing it since I was about 11, 12. So, but I grew up in a household with, 4 siblings, All of us grew up on comic books. So the things that you were talking about with animation, you know, there were the Saturday morning cartoons, you know, I'm Just a Bill, you know, going to Capitol Hill. I understand, you know, what that was about, because we all watched Saturday morning cartoons because that's the way it was for many, many decades. But then fusing that with the Marvel and DC comics from the 60s and 70s I grew up on, primarily because my older brothers collected that material and we were forced to read that. And then to impact on top of that, a love for things like Ray Harryhausen, you know, Clash of the Titans, the stop motion animation work. And then a more obscure love of 2001, A Space Odyssey, Stanley Kubrick, the aborted Dune movie by Alejandro Jodorowsky. All these things had a tremendous effect on me, both visually, but also in the way that you could push your stories. Because I'm a child of Heavy Metal magazine, which is the offshoot of Metal Hurlant. So I took all of those influences in addition to the underground comics that I had no business reading at the age of 8, like Spain Rodriguez Trash Man and George Mecca's Moondog. I shouldn't have been reading any of this stuff. But you know, Bud Plant was sending it to us via UPS. We'd buy it, he'd send it to us. But it's growing up seeing stuff that not only was in the Marvel and DC sphere, it was also seeing people like Jack Katz, who did the First Kingdom, you know, which when it was first coming out, so full frontal nudity, but these epic storylines with like nauseating like detail. So much detail would make your brain explode. So that work was fusing with the Pedro Bell, the Overton Lord, the Shusei Nagawaka with the pyramids, you know, with the rocket ships going into it with Earth, Wind, and Fire. So I took that stuff, and initially I wasn't doing Afrofuturism. Initially I was just doing regular comics, but then my oldest brother got on me because I had created this character. I've said this before in interviews, called the Master, which is this swordsman with 2 swords. And it was this white guy. And he was like, well, why are you doing that? Why can't you create a Black character that does that? So similar, I guess, to what Pam was saying, how, you know, it kind of was brought to your attention that, oh, there's this part of your life. So then everything became Black. And I've been doing it my entire life. It's the only thing artistically that I've ever done. And the first, you know, 20 years, it was comics. And then it switched to animation and game design. And now it's back in comics, thanks to John and Stacy Robinson, because now I'm back in it. But here I am now, 35 years older, but all of the things I learned in animation and in game design, I'm able to apply all of those tools technologically, which leads back to what Yatasha was saying about lifestyle. So all of those different things have forced me and are continually forcing me to expand not only what I do, but how I do it. So I'll give a very quick example. So Unreal Engine is the tool that they use to make games. It's been around for a while, since the early 2000s, roughly, by Epic Games. Well, over the last 3 years, that software has become, which is free, by the way, has become so advanced, they've started using it to do real-time movie making. So The Mandalorian, for example, is part of that. But because I have to produce so much material, and I've always used 3D components because I don't work on paper anymore, I'm all digital. So what I'm literally doing right now, myself and I have 5 interns, 3D interns, we're trying to build all of the assets, environments, vehicles, ray guns, all those different things in 3D, so I can lay out my comics like you would a 3D animated film. But the rendering, which was always the bottleneck because it would take so long to render that stuff, Unreal, particularly as of 2 weeks ago when they released Unreal 5, gives you real-time lighting. So with that real-time lighting, I can now output instantaneous renders and do my paint over effect that I've been doing for decades and I can retain the quality of my past work while also increasing the speed significantly. And that's what Afrofuturism is for me. It's not just a product. It's okay. It's the only thing I'm good at. All right, I said it.
I said that as you said it. Lorene and Pam and John, you in this line, there is something that you three are working on that you found this old character that, John, you are looking to infuse a new thing with that sort of bleeds into what we're talking about here. Is there something you all can say about that without giving away stores and stuff like that?
Well, we've been fortunate enough to be contacted by someone whose father actually produced comic strips for the Pittsburgh Courier back in the 50s. And he was trying to get some interest in these comic books, and Alan is no longer with us. And I guess he saw us online and reached out to us and said, hey, I have all of these comic strips from the Pittsburgh Courier. Would you be interested in them? And at that time, I wasn't going to say no to anything. So I said yes, and then told Lorene, he's going to send us this information. And, we had the Chisholm Cowboy, which was the first Black cowboy that traveled on the Chisholm Trail. Neil Knight, and two others that completely escaped me. And, John saw interest in Neil Knight. And he's been speaking to Lorene back and forth for over a year now, if not longer, about what he'd like to do with Neil Knight. And it has just taken on a life of itself, because when I initially looked at the comics, I made no connection again to Afrofuturism, but John clearly saw it.
All right, so John, give us the overview and then give us how that morphed in your mind.
What was really wild about it, I remember the first time I saw the Vintage Heroes, which was Mark Hunt, the Chisholm Kid, Guy Fortune, and Neil Knight, right?
Guy Fortune.
All in these different genres, these really, really popular adventure genres. Mark Hunt is a flatfoot detective, kind of like Mickey Spillane's Mike Hammer style. The cowboy genre has always been very popular in Western, adventure stories. And then of course, Guy Fortune is like James Bond. He's an international spy character, right? But the thing that attracted me to Neil Knight was the fact that he was modeled in the fashion of like Flash Gordon or like Buck Rogers, where he's this Black man who is a former pilot who ends up on a distant planet fighting against intergalactic evil, right? And I was like, wait, what? And this was created in 1950, right? By a white Jewish like news syndicate, but for a Black owned, newspaper, one of the biggest actually in history, the Pittsburgh Courier, for a Black audience, and how does that relate? And when I thought about that, I got really excited, because to me that's what the Black Panther was too, right? We talk about two Jewish creators who create a African king who becomes like this kind of Afrofuturist index, right? And this character predates the Black Panther, and also comes after Lion Man, which created in 1947, which in some ways could have been the first, and some people think the first Black superhero. So I just had never, he's got to be the first space-oriented
intergalactic
character. I just hadn't seen anything like it before. And I was hoping that they would just let me update him, understand more about how he was created and stuff like that, right? And so since then, we've just kind of had a partnership and trying to figure out different ways to deploy these characters, because all of them are extremely interesting, you know what I'm saying? And because they're such like tried and true genres, you can actually update them. You can do different ways to think about them for different audiences, and lo and behold, you have two Black women who have control over these Black characters now, which is mind-boggling. In a partnership, of course, with the estate, but still, that's just unheard of, right? So yeah, so that's what excited me about it. So.
Great, great. And Lorene, when you hooked up on this, what is sort of this new ideas, these ideas that you have for sort of expanding a lot of these characters and a lot of what you've got into the space of education to certainly highlight not only what we've done, you know, as Black folks in the comic space and in the animation space, but the sort of melding in sort of what we and particularly our young people can then begin to imagine and think about sort of going into the future with these characters that have been there, but that we can now use to sort of spring forward into new spaces.
Well, you know, it's really interesting because, again, when we got approached with these comic strips, you know, would you guys be interested in this? We were like, well, you know, our sweet spot is the 70s, but we'll take a look at it, right? We're not going to say no. And I think as we had an opportunity to step back, we, you know, came to realize that these are the first Black heroes to ever be featured in comic strips. So there's a historical importance of these characters, which is really how we connected with John, because he's very much into, you know, the historical, you know, importance of Black characters and preserving characters and making sure that we capture that history. And we clearly are about, you know, capturing unique aspects of Black history that people aren't aware of. So, you know, of the four characters, you know, the Chisholm Kid really is, you know, kind of, I guess, celebratory of Black cowboys, which is, it's taken me a while, honestly, to process through my brain, because you don't see Black cowboys, right? You think of John Wayne, you think all the cowboys are white. And, you know, I have a tendency sometimes to just like, okay, that's white foolishness. I can't, you know. So I never really made a connection that, you know, cowboys really were Black. I mean, you know, taking skills from Africa that we brought, you know, over here as we were enslaved, and then applying those, you know, after, you know, emancipation, those you know, skills in terms of dealing with cattle and stuff to, you know, have all of these Black cowboys that were responsible for driving cattle from Texas up to Kansas. I didn't know that. So I learned that in doing the research on the Chisholm Kid, because, you know, Black cowboys drove cattle on the Chisholm Trail. So, you know, it's always interesting to get, you know, these things that come from nowhere that force you to, you know, as curators and, you know, people who love history to actually do the research. But, you know, Neil Knight is the other very fascinating character, because he, as far as we know, is the first Afrofuturist, you know, character to appear in a comic strip. You know, so, you know, there may be, you know, other ones that were in, you know, comic books or whatever, but from a comic strip perspective, he's, you know, very unique and has that history. So, you know, we've been really thinking about how do you take, you know, Afrofuturism, and he's also, from what we believe, the first Black science-based hero to ever appear in a comic strip. So how do you take, you know, Afrofuturism and the science heritage of this character and match it up with the fact that there is a significant, you know, need, you know, imperative, urgency to get Black young folks involved in STEM and the sciences? You know, how do you use, you know, Neil Knight as a role model to drive interest in STEM? And that is what we are, you know, very blessed to be working with the incredible, you know, amazingly gifted and talented and creative, you know, master of all things scientific and sci-fi, John Jennings, to try to figure out how do we bring Neil Knight back to life, you know, and make him a hero, you know, that is relevant to young people today. And how do we actually, you know, fuse in Black history, because he's a character that has, you know, a Black history heritage, but also bringing the STEM history, you know, heritage, and, you know, make something amazing. You know, we're looking at, you know, mixed reality and virtual reality games, which is what I spent, you know, the past 2 weeks writing grants to try to get funded. And, you know, we're hoping to kind of get that off the ground, but that's where we're going. We're trying to make, you know, Neil Knight into, you know, a STEM franchise, you know, that will inspire and motivate and, you know, drive science connection and science identity in Black young people.
Yeah, I want to thank you for that, because that what that gives me. I've got a new nickname for John. We call him Elmer's. And he's gluing everybody together. My goodness.
Pretty funny.
So Jay, so we're gonna have to see, it always happens this way. We gotta close when I'm about to hit the high note. I want to start with John as we close out. So what are you doing nowadays, John? What's your future other than these Eisners that you keep racking up?
Well, let's see. Currently, I am working on a couple of things for this company called Marvel that I can't really talk about, but hopefully we'll be able to do soon. I'm also working on the character designs for Parable of the Talents with my good friend Damien Duffy for the follow-up to Parable of the Sower. And I'm editing, so many books. It's ridiculous.
Yes.
My friend Yatasha and everybody else, it seems, so those are my main things right there. But I'm trying to get back to doing some of my own work. But yeah, and I'm dabbling with doing it. I'm thinking about doing a new Blue Hand Mojo book. So that's
that's something too. 30 seconds, Yatasha. What are you doing? I'm hearing that you're on some curatorial committee. What is this about now?
Yeah, so Carnegie Hall is going to do a big Afrofuturism event beginning February 2022. So music all over New York City, and of course at Carnegie Hall itself, and it'll span funk and jazz and all the new fandangled genres we have that really speak to Afrofuturism. So I'm excited to be a part of that.
Oh my God.
Very much so.
You're gonna walk into Carnegie Hall with fro and throw on, huh?
I'm gonna be golden.
That's
very
right.
golden.
That's right. Pam, what's the Museum of Uncut Funk and you and Lorene getting into as we emerge out of this situation?
Well, as Lorene mentioned, she is doing a lot of grant writing and making connections with various institutions and people that can be a part of this process to help us get this this Neil Knight project off the ground and take it to the next level. And my part, I'm trying desperately to build our social media presence for the museum.
And where can you be found? Where can we find you?
Museum of uncutfunk.com. Our Facebook page is Museum of Uncut Funk. Our IG is museum_of_funk_ And we're on Twitter at Sister2Funky.
All right, cool. So Museum of uncutfunk.com. Let's start there, everybody. Tim, what's your world?
Got to finish the revised Maddie's Rocket Book 1 and the initial breakdown of my memoirs, Black Metropolis, by the end of July, early August. Then I got to between, say, August and early next year, in time for the Carnegie Festival. I have to prep a live reading that will occur during that show, as well as hopefully either Black Metropolis, the book will be out or done, and my middle grade book, Brother Robo, that I'm trying to finish now.
Fantastic. And Lorene, what is your final words on the thing as we close out here?
Got two things. We started a nonprofit called Funkintelligy Inc., where we are trying to really take the whole Black history aspect of what we do to another level. So raising money to fight to get Black history taught in all schools across the country, as well as to get other types of Black history educational stuff up and running. And we are, as we talked about, in the Neil Knight business, trying to get this Neil Knight virtual reality game produced, and get an opportunity to actually work with the amazing John Jennings. So that's what's on our priorities list.
Afrofuturism, funk, and the Black imagination, everybody. And look, thank you all to our special guests who have been with us. And as we sign off, I need to let you know, I want my funk uncut.
Uncut.
Bye-bye.